Hello, grade 11. Welcome to the third virtual learning session on creative nonfiction. This is Jasper Angeles, your virtual teacher for this lesson. In the previous virtual learning session, we have talked about a variety of ways to start and to draft. These ways we likewise refer to as strategies and techniques in drafting and starting allow us writers to loosen up and reflect on what to write about. If you were not here during the discussion of these ways to get started and to draft, I suggest you view the video on session 2, which is about starters and drafting. Now we shall proceed with the next topic in this subject. But before that, I want to show you some pictures of well-known TV shows in the Philippines. Let me begin with this one. What is the title of this K-drama series? What is it all about? Come on, write your answers on the comment box. What is the title of this K-drama series? If your answer is Hotel de Luna, you're right. This is a 2019 South Korean television series starring IU and Yoo Jin-gu as the owner and manager respectively of the eponymous hotel that caters only to ghosts. This hotel is a supernatural place not visible in its true form during the daytime. Its staff and clients are all souls or ghosts coming to terms with unfinished business in their former lives before they pass on to the afterlife and the cycle of reincarnation. Now, you might be wondering why I use this example when our subject is creative nonfiction. Don't get confused, class. I'm just using this one to introduce one particular tool that we may use in writing creative nonfiction. Let's go back to Hotel de Luna. Class, how is this K-drama series presented to the viewers? How is this K-drama series presented to the viewers? How is it organized? Is it like a movie which presents the plot in only a matter of hours? Alright, looking at this picture, you will see that this K-drama series is organized if not presented in episodes. Now, though these episodes follow the plot chronologically, each episode is independent of each other in terms of theme or content. Every episode, if you agree with me, talks of a lost soul, and from that story, the bigger story develops. This way of writing fiction is what we call episodic. Note that this shape is not only limited to writing fiction. We can also use this episodic approach in writing creative nonfiction. Later, we'll see what we mean by this. But right now, I want to show you another prominent TV show in the country. Are you familiar with this woman? Who is she and in what Filipino TV show does this actress usually appear? Come on, write your answers on the comment box. Who is she and in what Filipino TV show does she usually appear? Alright, so this woman, class, is actually Charo Santos Concho. Alright, and aside from being a media executive in ABS-CBN, she's also and has always been the host, if not narrator, of every true-to-life story dramatized in Maalaala Mo Kaya or MMK. Now, based on what you remember about MMK, how is the life of a letter sender or celebrity narrated or dramatized? Where does MMK begin? Where does it begin with the story of a certain person? If you're thinking about the childhood, if not the birth of the person whose life is being dramatized, then you're right. MMK begins with birth, going to childhood, or with childhood, going to teenage days, up to the present time with a mix of challenges that the person overcomes in the process. Now, do you have any idea about the term we use in presenting a story that begins with birth and ends either with a person's death or present life? Come on, write your answers on the comment box if you have any ideas about that. Okay, so we label MMK as chronological since the true-to-life story of an individual begins with what we have already mentioned a while ago. Now, both episodic and chronological varieties of creative nonfiction are two of the many structures that creative nonfiction writers may use in shaping their initial or preliminary drafts. Do not be confused, class. Initial or preliminary drafts are the write-ups that you did based on the techniques we have studied in the previous virtual learning sessions. They are not yet the final drafts because we still need to improve and organize them. This must be done in order for the draft to take a shape. Now, in this virtual learning session, you shall be introduced not only to the different shapes that creative nonfiction may take, but also the ways to identify and maintain the best shape for the initial draft written. Now, remember that creative nonfiction is flexible than any other kind of writings. In CNF, you may write the true story from beginning to end, or from the middle part to the end with flashbacks into the past so that the readers will understand the choices made by a certain character in real life. You may also use various voices. The character in the memoir, for example, may begin speaking as an adult and then speak as a child in another part of that memoir. The character may also speak as expected of him or her given a profession and then shift to another voice which may seem conflicting with the previous voice. The point here is that you may use all of these when writing any form of creative nonfiction. You can even do some literary experiment and combine, if not mix, various writing forms like poetry and headlines with the memoir you're writing. In CNF, therefore, you're given what we call the freedom of structure, or the freedom to choose whichever shape would be the best for the idea you are writing about. Now, regardless of form, the only rule is to guarantee, this is the only rule class, the only rule is to make sure that by the final draft, structure and meaning must complement each other. The final draft must have a beginning that sets up a promise that intrigues or an intriguing promise, a middle that develops that promise, and an end that satisfies without readers saying, "You already said that." Again, to just formally define what shape is, shape pertains to the structure of the piece or write-up. It is basically the form of the write-up, piece, or draft that contains the story. Now, before we proceed to the variety of shapes that we may consider in formally forming the draft, let us first identify the different ways that may help us in determining the appropriate shape for the draft. Let us begin with star and connect. This technique in determining the kind of shape to take works best if you have already written a lot of drafts about yourself or about the topic you're interested to write about. Here, what you have to do is just star or label your favorite parts and look for connections. After identifying which parts of are your favorite, ask yourself about the commonality among these parts. Why are they even important? By doing this and by answering these questions, class, you would know the central idea that you want to convey to the readers. Remember that creative nonfiction is not only about writing random thoughts. These random thoughts, class, must be organized in order for the readers to see the intention that the writer would like to come across, or what the writer wants them to know and understand. Furthermore, identifying your favorite parts would give you an idea which shape to use. Let's say that you can arrange the parts you've chosen in a chronological order. If this is the case, you can use the chronological shape. If the parts you labeled with a star are not chronologically connected but thematically related, then you may use the segmented shape. The parts, class, that you would identify as important are essential to knowing which shape would be suitable for the final draft that you would like to write. The next technique to help you in identifying which shape to use is the narrative arc. The arc links the beginning of your piece to the end and reveals how thoughts, characters, and events have changed. Obviously, you may use chronological, episodic, or framed shapes if you can identify the link from the beginning to the end, juxtaposed with changes mentioned. To do this, you ask yourself what I of the piece has learned, or what have I, as the author or writer looking back, learned. That thing you learned would serve as the central idea where all other ideas or events mentioned will revolve around. Let us look at this journal entry and let's try to identify what we think the writer has learned from a certain experience. I went to Immaculate Conception Academy with my classmate Anne. Since the campus is exclusive for girls, I wasn't able to apply nor accompany my classmate inside the campus. I was left alone and thoughts started to rush in my mind. Whenever I'm alone, walking, I feel as if I'm incomplete. I just can't imagine why of all the good things I've shown, I cannot be chosen. I cannot be something worth fighting for. I'm sad and I won't deny it. Just like what the guru said, I'll just allow the pain to flow. I realized that by repressing oneself to be sad when one is supposed to feel that way result into a more depressing situation, especially when one is alone. I have cried already a lot and not a single tear in my eyes was left. Painful, yes, but we can never do something about it. Now, reading the journal entry, what do you think has been learned by the writer? Again, reading this journal entry, what do you think has been learned by the writer? Come on, write your answers on the comment box. I don't know with you, but if I am the person to answer, I will say that the writer suggests that, number one, pain is inevitable in true love. You cannot just get away with it easily. You need the passing of time in order for the pain to subside. Now, this may sound like a cliche or anything similar to Augustus Waters' line in the book The Fault in Our Stars, but pain indeed demands to be felt. This is the reason why you need more time to heal. Another thing, the writer likewise tries to say that love is not forced. The reason why the writer ended up frustrated is because he or she believed that something can be done about the affection that was never returned. Now, these may be the central ideas from the journal entry, but you have to choose only one of these and look at the link that connects this with the beginning to the end of the story. Now, the third technique is, of course, look beyond the first line. Class, it's very rare for the beginning of your piece to be the best beginning. Read down the draft to see where there might be a stronger opening. Alright, stronger opening for you to know which among the lines or sentences in the draft is the best introductory line or sentence for the final draft. Now, to do this, you may also ask yourself, what is the piece really trying to say? An example of an initial draft that comprises a better introductory line after the ones written at the beginning is this one. Let's read this. Anyone who espouses that kids are always having fun doesn't know very much about children's hardships, how many painful times they experience in their childhood, and how they deal with these times. When I was a child, I'd tell my friends that my parents were imaginary, especially my dad. Now, what does this draft really want to tell us? Will this be all about an individual or any individual who might be oblivious to how children feel? Look at this draft again. What is being emphasized by the writer here? Alright, you'll see that towards the end, the main point is about the writer's experience with seemingly imaginary parents. The draft does not want to tell us about hardships of children in the hands of those who do not understand children. This draft clearly shows the feelings and experiences and reflections, okay, of the writer who may have been raised by physically present but mentally absent parents. He may have written the initial sentence in this draft to give the readers an idea of the experiences of kids who likewise have had the kind of parents that he or she had. Well, aside from determining what the draft really wants to say, this part about the writer labeling his or her own parents as imaginary gives more interest and surprise than the ones written at the beginning. Another on the list of techniques to determine the shape of a write-up or draft is this. Finish the line, I want to tell you that, and then write 3 titles. Similar to the ones or to the other techniques, this one helps you as the writer to identify the central idea of the drafts you're working on. What you need to do is just complete what I want to tell you, that so that the writer or you would become aware of what you really want to tell your audience or your readers. And similar to what I've already mentioned, only one idea must prevail. All other ideas must be subordinate to the central idea that you would come up using the various techniques to identify which is the best shape for your initial draft. Now, this may be the three important ideas deduced from the journal entry, but only one must be considered central. The other ideas or pieces in the draft should serve as a support in the form of narratives or other parts that resemble the building blocks of creative nonfiction. Now, aside from finishing the line, write 3 titles for the draft. Be specific with your title. Based on the journal entry, which do you think among these 3 titles would be suitable for that journal entry? Again, if we are to entitle that journal entry we've read a while ago, what would be the best title? Come on, write your answers on the comment box. Alright, I think that you would also answer The Companion of Pain. Isn't it intriguing? Why would pain be a companion? My First Love and Reflections might be considered good titles, but only one that stands out makes the readers interested. And in here, we think that the title Companion of Pain would be much more interested on the reader's end. Looking for repetitions is another way of determining the best, if not most appropriate shape for the initial draft. Let me show you an example of a piece with repetitions. It is a bright summer day in 1947. It is Easter Sunday, 1950. I'm 8 years old and a tomboy. I'm 14 years old, or I'm 14 and babysitting for my brother, Bill. I'm 27 and my baby daughter is almost 3. Note that this is not poetry. Each and every sentence here belongs to a particular paragraph in the memoir written by Alice Walker. Do you notice what concept is repeated in each introductory sentence? Again, we're talking about here the repetition of a component or a concept. Again, do you notice what concept or component is being repeated in this introductory sentence? Again, class, we're looking for a concept that is repeated in each sentence. We're not referring to the repeated words or pronouns like I. In 20 seconds, I'd like you to identify the concept mentioned in it as, or mentioned in It is a Bright Summer Day in 1947 that is repeated in the succeeding sentences. Your 20 seconds starts now. Alright, what are your answers? If you notice, there are 2 concepts repeated in this set of sentences. They are the date and age, which capture the key moments in Walker's life. The date refers to the inclusion of Bright Summer Day in 1947 and Easter Sunday 1950. Age, on the other hand, is suggested by the following highlighted words. Alright, so if you see repetitions in terms of age and date, you might think of using chronological shape or even segmented, or even the segmented shape if your intention is to present the memoir by themes uncovered in each particular period of your life. Remember, class, that any repeated element or concept provides unity in your work. This unity or unifying element may determine which shape will be the best for your draft. Now, another example would be this work from Susan Allen's Thoughts, or Susan Allen Thoughts Going to the Movies. Aaron takes me only to art films. Bob takes me only to movies that he thinks have a redeeming social conscience. Sam likes movies that are entertaining. I go to some movies by myself. What concept here or element is being repeated, class? Alright, the instances of going back to movie houses. Maybe there is a particular insight in every movie moment she had with a particular person. Now remember that all of these strategies in determining the best shape for the draft you will be working on tell only one advice. Identify the central idea that you want to tell through your non-fictional story. Look at what unifies everything that you have written and select that central idea where all other ideas will become subordinate to. Okay, so given all of the things that we have said, I think that it would be easy to answer this question. What are the strategies that you can use to find out the best shape for your draft or write-up? You have 30 seconds to write your answers on the comment box. Enumerate the strategies that would help you think of the best shape for your draft. Timer starts now. Let me see your answers. If your answers, class, are similar to the ones that you can see here on the screen, then one will say that you're really listening intently. Now that we know how to determine the best shape for the draft, let's proceed to the different shapes or various shapes that we may use to form our final draft. Let us begin with the chronological shape. This form, which moves forward from beginning to end in a straight narrative line, usually has a rising action, climax, and resolution. It is good for stories with a surprise, a twist of plot, and an emphasis on suspense. You use the chronological shape if your intention is to bring your readers to the beginning of your life up to the present moment. Now, since in creative nonfiction we make use of elements in creative writing, when writing your story in a chronological shape, it would be better to begin with identifying one central conflict you had in your life and the other minor conflicts that emerge out of that central conflict. For example, you may use character versus self as conflict wherein the struggle is within you. You may say that you're easily attached to the things that you love. And this becomes a problem for you because you find it difficult to move on from the things that you've been used to. Now, aside from the conflict, you need to think of a certain twist in your own story and even develop the climax or the decision-making part of the story suspenseful. Elements of works or examples of works written in a chronological shape are the stories told in the TV show MMK. Each story begins with childhood going to the present time. Now, you would not be hooked into the show or even bothered wait for the next part of the story despite the commercial ads if the story was not delivered in a suspenseful manner. That inclusion of suspense and plot twist makes us stay tuned to the stories in MMK. Another shape is segmented shape. This structure uses ways other than time or organized reality, by free association, by theme, or by juxtaposing disparate thoughts. This is in contrast with the chronological shape wherein the story is told from a beginning to a conflict to an end. Segmented shape may be used in memoirs, but the focus is not on the sequence from beginning to end, but on themes or other categories. An example would be this memoir from Maya Angelou. You can see in the table of contents that her story was not told chronologically but according to segments that may not necessarily be arranged in order. We can think that each chapter presents a theme or insight about Angelou's life. Now, in the case of other forms of creative nonfiction, there is the use of the white space or asterisks between segments to signal shifts from one segment to another, like in this example. Here we see the topic of grief and how the writer describes it in several ways. Note that the first part is segmented from the second part using the group of asterisks here. You can think of the succeeding parts as still related to grief, but the first one may have focused on explaining grief on a personal level, while the succeeding ones in a more general tone. Another kind of shape is the framed shape. This structure starts in the present, flashes back to the past, and returns to the present. It's good for connecting who you are with who you were and showing how the past lingers in your life. In the photograph I asked of you, this I think became evident. There you used your picture to create a scene and even a dialogue between the you in the picture and the you as the one looking at the picture. In your works, you would see the connection between the present and the past. Note, however, that a personal essay can be considered under the framed shape because there, you begin with the present time, get a snippet of the past, and use that to make sense of the present. It's really up to you on how you will use this shape. Just be mindful of the principle about the framed shape. Alright, so next is the comparison and contrast shape. This form compares events, people, and ideas either by weaving back and forth fluidly or setting up a comparison, discussing one, then the other, and finally summing them up. Think of an essay class. In the body of an essay, there are paragraphs, right? You may compare and contrast two things either in one paragraph or devote the comparison on one paragraph and devote the contrast on another paragraph. You may also think of a variety of ways to compare and contrast two things aside from these two ways. In this article by Ellen Barry on how to get away with murder in small town India, you would very well see how the writer exposed a corrupt system by contrasting the events pointed out by the officials and the ones authentically and shockingly observed by the very residents where the murder happened. Multiple perspectives is likewise one of the shapes that creative nonfiction writers may use to form the final draft. From the name itself, this shape allows for the accommodation of the points of view of the characters about a particular matter. A car accident, for example, might be described both by those involved and those who have observed it. This is good for showing how different cultures perceive events in different and even opposing ways, and also for letting readers decide truth for themselves because there are several forms of truth according to the points of views of the characters in the story that were written. Now, this one is rather familiar to you because the episodic shape is mostly used by drama series both in TV or in Netflix. This is not chronological nor segmented or does not rely or resemble any of the chronological or the segmented form. This is not chronological because the story may begin in any significant part of the writer's life, not segmented because one episode is needed to develop the next one up to the last one. Remember that episodic shape is a compilation of vignettes or small stories, short stories, very short stories about the same people or places over time. Q&A can be used also as a shape for the final draft. This work is typically done in a setting of an interview. You can actually make a story out of an interview. You may even use this shape in writing a portrait. If questions and answers in an interview can be arranged to form a story, letters can likewise be compiled and made into an interesting narrative or compilation of letters. This is done in the epistolary shape. It uses the letter format to tell a story, either in one letter or in an exchange of letters. If you remember the Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, you would see some parts where in narration as a journal entry were juxtaposed with an exchange of letters between Anne and a friend. This could be done to tell the story from a perspective or from the perspective of two real-life characters. Now, do you remember when we said that creative nonfiction is experimental and fluid? I believe that this shape, the multi-genre shape, is the tangible example for that explanation. Here, the writer uses all possible writing elements to produce the draft. There may be bits of poems, letters, interior monologue, or other fragments from creative writing. Photographs and drawings can likewise be used to supplement the telling of the story. This example may be a reflection, but here you will see the use of some lines from the song Let It Go to emphasize the feelings of the writer. Now we go to the more restricted shapes of creative nonfiction. The first of these restrictive shapes is the inverted pyramid. Being one of those two is like writing a news article but in a more figurative and creative one. You know that when you're writing news, the article needs to be short, right? Focusing on the answers on WH questions that can be found on the lead. In inverted pyramid creative nonfiction, the same lead is used, but the details of the facts are creatively elaborated in the subsequent paragraphs that are not necessarily short. Again, this is just like writing a news article but in a creative way, with still the lead and the lead being the central idea where all the other paragraphs under the lead is or are anchored on. The last shape for creative nonfiction, which is also rather restrictive, is the deductive shape. This is just like an essay class, just like essay writing. This form begins with the main idea or thesis statement, followed by support for this idea. Let's see an example. This class is an introduction from the prologue to Bertrand Russell's autobiography. Let's read this. Three passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life. The longing for love, the search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. These passions, like great winds, have blown me hither and thither, in a wayward course over a great ocean of anguish, reaching to the very verge of despair. Here, the thesis statement is very clear. It tells us that the essay will talk about the writer's three passions: love, search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. If there are 3 points, then there will be 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph should explain in detail each of the 3 points mentioned in the thesis. Let's see if the next paragraph or the first paragraph in this essay follows what we have said. Let's read this. I've sought love first because it brings ecstasy. Ecstasy so great that I would often have sacrificed all the rest of life for a few hours of this joy. I've sought it next because it relieves loneliness, that terrible loneliness in which one shivering consciousness looks over the rim of the world into the cold, unfathomable, lifeless abyss. Is this about the first point in the thesis? The answer is yes, because sentences here in this paragraph explain the reasons why the writer chose love as one of the things that he is passionate about. Now, I do hope that you will remember not only the ways to determine the best shape for your draft, but also the various shapes themselves that you may use in forming the final draft. To just make you engage with the discussion, let me ask you to enumerate again the various ways of shaping the draft. You have 30 seconds to do this. What are the various ways, based on our discussion, what are the various ways of shaping the draft? Write your answers on the comment box. Timer begins. All right, so what are your answers? If your answers are the same as the following here, then you got the correct answers. Very good. Now, say for example, you have a draft already and you notice that it would be best if you make the draft into a segmented shape. You also notice that your draft is rather short and incomplete. What will you do to improve your draft? How do you develop, or how do we develop the draft such that it fits into the shape that we have chosen? The answer can be found in the building blocks of creative nonfiction. What are these 3 building blocks that may help you regain or will help you lengthen, if not improve, your draft? Let's begin with the first building block, which is the scene. Scenes class refer to descriptions and dialogues. Again, they refer to descriptions and dialogues. By putting on some descriptions, you make the readers better understand the character in your story. Dialogues likewise do the same effect. Dialogues and descriptions zoom in a close-up manner to capture key moments in the story. Let us have this example from How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzaldúa. We're going to have to control your tongue, the dentist says, pulling out all the metal from my mouth. Silver bits plop and tinkle into the basin. My mouth is a mother lode. The dentist is cleaning out my roots. I get a whiff of stench when I gasp. I can't cap that tooth, yet you're still draining, he says. We're going to have to do something about your tongue. I hear the anger rising in his voice. My tongue keeps pushing out the wads of cotton, pushing back the drills, the long, thin needles. I've never seen anything as strong or as stubborn, he says. And I think, how do you tame a wild tongue? Train it to be quiet. How do you bridle or saddle it? How do you make it lie down? What elements of the scene were used by the writer to paint the picture of a wild tongue? What did the writer use in order to paint the picture in our minds what we mean by a wild tongue? Notice that the writer did not just say that, oh, we have a wild tongue, or that the tongue cannot be controlled here. The writer used dialogue and described the actions of the dentist. You would note that the writer's tongue is indeed unruly or wild because, as the dentist said, something needs to be done about the tongue, and that there was an oozing tone of anger from the dentist's voice already, right? Even the tongue was described as something that pushes the wads of cotton. So in this way, the descriptions and the dialogues, in the way of putting on a scene, the writer was able to tell us that the tongue is indeed wild. All in all, we can see that both descriptions and dialogues contributed to the establishment of the idea that the tongue is indeed a wild one. But of course, class, we know that the wild tongue here is just a symbol for the personality of the writer being the wild one. Note, however, that even though without a dialogue here, another example, you can establish the scene. A while ago, in our example, we have there the dialogue and the descriptions, right? Here we would have only descriptions, not dialogues. Let's see this. In this example from Alice Walker, you will see that there was no use of dialogues, only descriptions. But even though this is the case, the readers were put into the writer's experience. It is as if the reader is in the writer's body, seeing everything what the writer sees. Again, this is what we call the scene. Later, we will see when will be the best time to add a scene, aside, of course, from the fact that you can use this to highlight the kind of relationship that exists between two characters or introduce the readers to a setting in the writer's life. Now, let's have the second building block, which is what we call the summary. The summary class takes the form of a backstory. It spells out what happened before, after, and or between the moments narrated in the story. These backstories are not mere stories, class, that we add just because we want to lengthen the piece. You add this to give the readers an idea or insight about the cultural or political context of the story. For us to see how a summary is included, let's use this work of Alice Walker again. Let's read this. All right, so this was the first paragraph that I've shown a while ago for the scene. Okay, let's look at this paragraph. It is a bright summer day in 1947. My father, a fat, funny man with beautiful eyes and a subversive wit, is trying to decide which of his 8 children he will take with him to the country fair or county fair. My mother, of course, will not go. She is knocked out from being most of us ready. I hold my neck still against the pressure of her knuckles as she hastily completes the braiding and rebonning of my hair. Now let's see the next part. My father is the driver for the rich old white lady up the road. Her name is Miss May. She owns all the land for miles around as well as the house in which we live. Now, remember that the previous paragraph tells us something about the present time, right? Right now, as in the writer writing something about what she sees right now. The writer is describing to the readers how her parents look like and what is she currently doing. In other words, the scene. Okay, here in this paragraph about the father, here we will see an addition of a summary. Why? Because the writer here brings us to the backstory of her dad's job or of her father's job and its socio-political implications. Note that she did not say that they are poor or that there exists social inequality in the place where she was brought up. We as the readers made this assumption that there seems to be social inequality from the backstory about her father's job. If, for example, you're telling something about a typical day at school and began introducing some of your friends, you can add a backstory about how you met them with an intention to tell them something about a Filipino custom. You can think of a variety of ways to include a scene or a summary. Just remember that this is a backstory used to include a cultural, historical, or socio-political nugget in the same way that Alice Walker a while ago introduced the backstory about her father's job. Okay, and with that, her intention is to tell us that there seems to be a social inequality in the place where she grew up. The last building block here is what we call the reflection or the writer's thoughts about what is happening and what it means. This refers to what the writer thinks about the scene or the summary included in the draft. Let's go back to his part or to that part about the father. Remember that this is an included summary that serves as a backstory to the father's job. Now let's read the next part, okay, after this. All I remember about her is that, alright, her pertaining to Miss May, all I remember about her is that she once offered to pay my mother 35 cents for cleaning her house, raking up piles of her magnolia leaves, and washing her family's clothes, and that my mother, she of no money, 8 children, and a chronic earache, refused it. But I do not think of this in 1947. I am 2.5 years old, and I want to go everywhere my daddy goes. The words all I can remember or all I remember should have given you an idea that indeed this is a reflection or the thoughts of the writer about Miss May. Based on her reflection, how does she regard Miss May here? How does she look at Miss May? Alright, I know that you are likewise thinking that the writer views Miss May as offensively stingy. And why is that? Can you imagine paying a person only 35 cents for cleaning almost everything in one's house? That's outrageous. But note that the writer did not say that Miss May is stingy or that Miss May belittles or insults them. She shows this by honestly saying what she thinks about that event she barely remembers. Right, so we go back to the idea or to the concept of creative nonfiction, which is not to tell everything to the readers. You let the readers conclude for themselves based on the things that you are presenting in your own story. The reflection class should convey your tone through the choice of words, basically telling the readers what you think about the situation without directly telling it. Now, I hope that you would use these building blocks in order to improve your draft in the future. But let's say you included or inserted a scene, a reflection, or a summary into your own draft. We will label this insertion. And if we label this insertion, what do we call the insertion of these building blocks into the draft to develop the shape? This inclusion class is what we call the riff. The riff allows writers to add scenes. Again, the riff allows writers to add scenes, summaries, or reflections, and then return to the main storyline. A riff is like something that's placed in between before the story continues. Alright, you can describe taking a sip of a coffee or a sip of your coffee and riff about who knows what for 3 paragraphs or 3 pages before returning to that coffee cup to its saucer. It's like when the character looks at the window and remembers something. This one described for 1 page before returning to the same scene, making the character move to another place or something similar to this. Let's go back to Walker's memoir. Here, the first paragraph tells us of how Walker describes a moment in 1947. Instead of continuing to the rest of the things she sees during that day, we were given a riff in the form of a summary that tells the backstory about her father's job. This was then followed by another riff in the form of her reflection about one character in the summary she mentioned. After these two riffs, the character may proceed with the things she narrates or describes at present. This is how the riffs work, class. Alright, so you are telling a particular story at present, but then you begin shifting to a backstory and then giving your reflections about it before returning to the present part of the story. Now let's have an exercise. Let us read this snippet first. I don't remember this. I was too young, but my mother and father told of my childhood habit time and again. From their point of view, their child wakes up in the middle of the night, wakes them up too, not with cries, but with giggles. She laughs and recites all the words they have taught her litany. I picture mom getting back into bed after the first time. What's the matter? Nothing. She's laughing and reciting her words. Now? Yes, now. Night after night, I did the same. Now, this paragraph actually consists of 3 building blocks, but with 2 riffs. Nevertheless, we want to label the 3 parts included in this paragraph. Now, to label them properly, I have colored the parts of the paragraph that represent the building blocks. So we have 3. Right? So we have, I don't remember this, I was too young, the succeeding sentences up to what's the matter, nothing, she's laughing and reciting her words, and the other things. Now, your task is to determine the correct building block represented by colors blue, orange, and yellow. Which of these is considered a scene, a summary, or a reflection? You have 30 seconds to do this. Timer starts now. All right. So what are your answers? Let us begin with the one colored in blue. This is obviously a reflection since the writer is contemplating on what he or she remembers about his or her childhood. The next one is considered a summary because it presents a backstory about something in the writer's childhood he or she does not remember anymore. Now, to amplify the summary, a scene in the form of a dialogue is also added. Now, let's have another exercise that makes us both discern and think of how a building block of creative nonfiction may be used. One day, Dad taught me to say Minneapolis, Minnesota, a triumph of such magnitude it became my permanent finale. New words inserted before its resonance. When they heard Minneapolis, Minnesota, my parents knew they could go back to sleep. Again, I have colored the parts of this paragraph for easy labeling. Which is which in this paragraph? Which is the scene, summary, or reflection? You have 30 seconds. Go. Okay. So what are your answers? So the yellow one is a summary which is evidently a backstory about that moment when the character successfully pronounced or said the word Minneapolis, right? The character's thoughts, on the other hand, during the time he or she managed to say this word is of course the reflection. The action of his or her parents telling a story that happened long ago is another form of a summary. So in here, you won't be able to see a scene because first there is no dialogue involved, and you wouldn't be able to see a description, okay, pertaining to the present time when the character, as in also the writer, wrote this particular piece, or from that particular moment that the writer is taking the story from. I think that this would be easy if we'll take in mind that the summary is any narrated event that happened in the past, while the scene is something that currently happens at the present moment in the form of description and dialogues. Now, when should we use the building blocks as riffs? If you have a key moment that goes by too fast, riff with the scene. Do not make the story too rigid or tight by just narrating what happened in the past or by just describing things. Add some dialogues as riffs. If you're missing a backstory about a character, place, or event, riff with a summary. And when you're short on reflection, riff with a few interesting reactions to what is happening. To summarize everything we have talked about this day, remember that first, the initial or preliminary draft needs to be shaped in a particular structure. Second, before deciding on the shape, determine first the message or the main message of your initial draft. Determine which shape would be best to convey the central idea of your draft. And lastly, maintain the message and the shape using riffs in the form of scenes, summaries, and or reflections. Now, let us have some review. I have here 3 questions, class. Please write the correct answer on the comment box. Let's begin with this one. What shape will you use if you want your memoir arranged by theme instead of chronological order? Again, what shape will you use if you want your memoir arranged by theme instead of chronological order? Come on, write your answers on the comment box. 20 seconds, go. All right. So the correct answer is segmented shape. Remember that the segmented shape allows for a memoir chapters. Again, the segmented shape allows for a memoir chapters or the chapters of a memoir divided by themes, not by chronological sequence. Let's have another question. What shape will you use if you want your memoir arranged by theme but in a chronological order? Again, what shape will you use if you want your memoir arranged by theme but in a chronological order? So there is a sort of a sequence, but the memoir is still written according to theme. Come on, write your answers on the comment section. 20 seconds, go. Okay, so the correct answer is episodic shape. Remember that memoirs can be arranged chronologically but with greater emphasis on themes. In a chronological shape, the sequence of events is given more premium than the theme. In an episode, a theme is given emphasis than the other events or the order of events. The order of events is secured by the chronological sequence of episodes leading to a particular ending. Let's have the last question. The draft lacks the writer's thoughts on the surroundings he or she mentions in the memoir. What kind of riff should be added? Again, the draft lacks the writer's thoughts on the surroundings he or she mentions in the memoir. What kind of riff should be added? You have 20 seconds. Go. All right, so we're dealing with the thoughts of the writer. So the answer is definitely reflections. All right. So it is my hope and expectation that you would remember this lesson when you write your initial draft for creative nonfiction. This is again Jasper Angeles, your virtual teacher for creative nonfiction. See you again on our next virtual learning session.